On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we are asking the question, is the rest of the league as well as some of the fan base sleeping on the Lightning this year? We break it all down. We talk about some of the expectations we have as well as expectations for players. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Denker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Just a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the summer rolls on and the sports aren't as plenty, we still have tons of deals going on over at FanDuel.com as they are hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. On this episode, we're discussing some of the, negativity surrounding the Lightning right now. You know, there's a lot of people saying, or at least from what I saw on social media, as I posed the question the other day, where do we see the Lightning, or what are our expectations? I'll talk about mine. There was some negative feedback from a prominent figure in my eyes in the Lightning content world. I won't name them, but they don't think that the Lightning are going to be that competitive this year, as well as we talk about super early expectations for this team, as well as breaking down some player expectations. Before we grab any of those topics, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and follow us wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead and subscribe to our channel there. Hit that notification button so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified and be able to watch it. So in case we've talked, if we already talked about it, because I feel like we talked about this maybe beginning of July, well, guess what? We're going to talk about it now because things have happened since July, or since at least the playoffs have ended for the Lightning, and things, at least in my eyes, are different. Expectations are different. So this, as I previously just got done talking about, how there are some people in the Lightning fandom, some of those that are just fans, and some of those that are people that do make a living, as I do, covering the Lightning. And I don't understand the negativity so much about this Lightning team in terms of a lot of people not thinking that they are going to be anything special this season. And I find that hard to believe that, yes, you lose Steven Stamkos, but it's you still have really not that much of a loss in terms of, Steven Stamkos, the leader of your team, the best player on your team in terms of what he brought to the dressing room. 100% can't argue with that. But if we're going to sit here and say that Steven Stamkos was the difference, because there's some individuals that don't even think that the Lightning are going to make the playoffs this year, which is a wild thing to even say. If you want to think it, that's fine. But I mean, I don't understand, that's a pretty ballsy thing to vocalize, whether it be in person with another person or on social media. It's also a very dramatic thing because it's insinuating that Steven Stamkos was the difference maker on the Lightning in terms of whether or not they were making the playoffs last year. And for anyone to say that, or to insinuate that was the case, clearly did not watch this team last year. And if they did, they weren't paying attention. Because as we all know, Steven Stamkos, yes, had a very good season, another 40-goal season, phenomenal, great. But he wasn't a difference maker on this team. He did pick it up here and there throughout the course of the season. There was games in which he really helped the Lightning win those games, but by no stretch of the imagination was he a difference maker or really the kind of guy that, or player really, that if you didn't have him in the lineup, you weren't going to play well. That's not what this was. I mean, there was a multitude of games last year in which Steven Stamkos didn't even make a difference. It wasn't really until the playoffs till we really saw a whole different, really a guy who was out on the ice and really carrying this team. Now, a lot of that has to do, of course, with the differences in which this team played in the regular season as well as in the playoffs. The regular season, of course, Nikita Kucherov just doing everything he can almost on a nightly basis to get this team to win games, and not only win games, but stay in the playoff hunt. Whereas Steven Stamkos on most of those nights, yeah, he scored goals. Absolutely not going to dispute it. But he wasn't the top guy. He wasn't even the third guy on this team. He wasn't even, I think, the fourth best player on this team at times. And I think a lot of that reasoning for people feeling that way is obviously because of what he stood for on this team, what he did during his time on this team. And whenever change happens, people just drastically assume that things are going to go south. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes that is not. But you look at the roster that Steven Stamkos is leaving behind to go to Nashville, mind you. I still think that this is a team not only that could win games, and we'll talk about more about this in the second segment. This is not only a team that could win games, but this is a team that could, if everything clicks at the right time, could make a play for the division. I know that's a pretty crazy thing to say considering the Panthers, who are really the top team in this division. But Panthers might have a post-cup hangover, literally and figuratively. The Lightning might just get hot at the right moment, tread water all year, and bam, you're heading into March with 2-3 points behind the Panthers in the division, and that's when you really take off and run away with the division. Yeah, like I said, a lot of things need to click, and we'll talk about that in the second segment. But to think that, all right, if you want to say the Lightning might finish as a wild card team, that's one thing. Okay, I'm willing to say that's a reasonable assumption to have, considering where this team finished and how better put together the rest of the division was last year. But now you have a healthy Andrei Vasilevsky. Now you have Jake Getsel, who I'm curious to see where he will stand in Lightning fans' minds, not only at the start of the season, but also as we get into February, as we get into March. The difference, or hopefully the difference, that people have in terms of their idea of him, because if it seems like a lot of people think of him as a maybe a second line guy, which is understandable. It's interesting. A lot of people haven't even heard of Jake Getsel up until this time, which, listen, go back, look at his stats. Yeah, not overly impressive, but you see who he played with. This isn't any slouch walking into the Lightning on the first line. You have a guy who has been there, who has won at the highest level, who has played alongside one of the greatest players of this generation in Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. So you're losing a leader in Steven Stamkos free agency, but you gained one in Jake Getsel to free agency. And on top of that, you get Cam Atkinson, who, yes, sexy name on paper, on the ice, not as much in terms of production, but you get a guy like we saw kind of, I guess, a kind of almost a situation that we saw what Corey Perry was in a couple of years ago when he was with this Lightning team. Comes in, right situation, right time, right player. the Lightning could greatly benefit from someone like that if everything works out. So I don't understand all this negativity surrounding this team. Yeah, you lost some guys, but you also gained a lot. And I think that a lot of the Lightning fans that feel that way, that don't think that the Lightning aren't nearly as competitive this year as they were last year, I think you need to take a step back. I think you need to understand this franchise is in a better situation, believe it or not, at the NHL level as well as at the AHL level. You got a lot of pieces down there in Syracuse that you could bring up and help you out, not only the beginning of the season, but as the season goes on, a.k.a. piece meaning Connor Geekie, who was the 11th overall pick not too long ago in the NHL draft. So a lot of things that could go very, very right for the Lightning this year. And we'll talk about more about that in our super early expectations, because at least I do, and I'm sure some other people do, as I saw from Twitter. A lot of people there's a good mix, which is good, but there's a good number of people in my camp that I think feel as strongly as I do about where this team can go and where we expect them to go. So we'll talk about just exactly what those expectations are coming up in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about today's first sponsor on the show, and that is our friends over at Indeed.Com. Now, in today's world, we're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you could connect with candidates faster. I had a friend that opened up his own business about 6-7 months ago, and it exploded in terms of the amount of money he was making, the demand that was being thrown at him, and he had to hire people fast. And he used Indeed, and he was able to hire 3 quality people that he has promoted already twice. And now he has to hire more people to fill their positions and to fill the positions of those people as well as they continue to progress and as they continue to get bigger. And he used Indeed. So go ahead to Indeed.com. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. You could also help us out and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go ahead and do that. Comment below this video. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of chatter in the comment section regarding some of the things that are said on today's episode. If you want to follow us on our social media pages, go on over to LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. You can give me a follow on Twitter at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. I love hearing from all of you, and you can find more of my work over at boltsbythebay.com. I'm so excited to talk about this because, granted, it's been fairly busy, fairly not busy at all. Fairly dead for the NHL offseason, which is normally the case, which, we have been doing our summer of 04 rewatching the 2004 Eastern, really the whole playoff run in terms of the Lightning when they went to their first Stanley Cup title, won their first Stanley Cup title. And we'll be continuing that, but it's good to take a break and kind of sit back and discuss really just, some really hard-hitting things, and it's weird that this whole topic got as much reception as it did, I kind of figured that a lot of people, a lot of Lightning fans were kind of in the same camp, that we all thought even that with Steven Stamkos leaving, and even before it was known officially that he was going to leave, I felt like leading up to that, I felt like a lot of us, including myself, figured that the Lightning were in a good spot to be able to have a team without Stamkos in the equation. And it seemed as though that they pretty much were expecting him to, which obviously because of how fast Getzel signed. But now that it seems like this team is kind of put together, I mean, there's some little odd ends that need to be put in, but before the season ends. But that's like minor league stuff. You look at this team and you look at what they have in Syracuse, and also real quick, the individual that I had the exchange with, and I'm not bashing them, and please don't go to my Twitter account and bash them. If you want to see the exchange, go ahead. But I'm just not, I don't feel any way about it. I just was interested by his response. And he brought age into the equation as to why the Lightning won't be good, which really made no sense considering, the Lightning were the third youngest team last year in the entire league. And, they picked up some pieces this year, and it's really, they didn't really get that much older. If you really think about it, this year they're pretty much the same. They're the average age on this team right now is 28. So that really doesn't, it if anything, they're the third oldest, which 28 is not old. A lot of people say, and including this individual, that you hit your prime in the NHL around then, and then once you get into your 30s, you quickly fall out of it, which also doesn't make any sense. Considering you look at what Stamkos did last year, you look at what Kucherov did last year. I know Kucherov was he was 29, 30, so I don't have a problem with it. I don't think age really matters at this point. And quite frankly, I don't think it ever did. I mean, unless this team is, 32, 33, whatever, that's a problem. But 28 is not a problem. If anything, you have a multitude of leaders, and that's where the expectations come in with this Lightning team. With the amount of leadership and experience that you have on this team, I think the expectations should be higher, if anything. And going forward, I mean, also you also have, decent amount of money to play with. I mean, not a lot, but there's still some deals that can be made. I'm sure if Julien Brisebois is aggressive enough to do so, I'm sure he'll pull the trigger on something. But you have a good opportunity here to not only go past expectations, but kind of surprise the rest of the division, considering I look at the rest of the division, especially Toronto and Boston. And if you asked me this time last year, I would have said Toronto and Boston, those teams scare me. I'm going to be looking back on them or to them for the duration of the season. And I think everyone could have agreed then that would have been a very reasonable thing to say. And then now with everything that has transpired, especially up in Toronto, or lack thereof not happening, those aren't teams that really scare me. They aren't teams that, the Lightning still need to go out there and win games, absolutely, and play well and play the way that we expect them to play. But it's not a situation in which, you're going to be fighting for a wild card spot. I fully expect this team to be fighting for a third spot in the division, maybe even a second spot. And really what it comes down to with all of that, as I alluded to before, is getting off to a good start. I mean, one of the advantages you have this season is a healthy Andrei Vasilevsky, a guy who I really think caught his stride in the playoffs. I mean, he did everything that you could have asked of him, short of throwing shutouts on a nightly basis, which obviously in that kind of situation where the defense was so putrid at times against the Panthers and just how high the Panthers were sailing, I mean, you really couldn't have asked more out of him that was inhumanly possible. And I think that having him like that now to begin the season, I think you're putting yourself in a better situation to just get off on the right foot, as well as just be able to get some points early on in the first couple of months and really just establish your spot in the division. I think that really expectations early on for this Lightning team the first couple of months should be second in the division, if not first, if the Panthers get off to a slow start. Which, listen, saying that a Stanley Cup team getting off to a slow start is not the most ludicrous thing you could ever say. I mean, I fully expect the Panthers to get off to a slow start. That doesn't mean they're not going to make the playoffs. That doesn't mean they're not going to finish top 3. I fully expect them to win the division again. But if we see even 50% of how the Lightning, well, I would probably raise that a little higher, maybe 65, 70% of how the Lightning played during the month of March last year, in which they were the best team in the NHL. If you see that, especially with a healthy Vasilevsky, with a blue line, at least those first two combinations that are able to kind of just hold down the fort, and especially if Ryan McDonagh plays the way he played in Nashville, this team should be able to at least keep things close in the division behind the Panthers. And I wouldn't be surprised if they play like that throughout the course of the season, which obviously people get hurt. I mean, death, taxes, and Eric Chernak getting hurt, it's just all certain at this point. We all know it's going to happen at some point. It's just a matter of when and for how long is he going to be out. We shall see and cross that bridge when we get there. But as long as the back end stays somewhat solid, I think this offense could really do a very good job. And now that you've removed Steven Stamkos out of the equation, some people might think this is ridiculous to say, but I think all it does is allow guys like Braden Point, guys like a Brandon Hagel, and even John Cooper can play around a little bit more. You know, you're not really handcuffed by having to play your captain on that first line, or even at times on the second. You could kind of move things around, allow Kucherov to kind of take more control, get the defenseman more offensively involved, which if you've been a listener of this podcast, for the last couple of years, I've been almost to a certain degree screaming about it. So those are my expectations for this team. And I think that as far as the playoffs go, I think if they get into the playoffs, which I think if they make obviously the second spot in the division, they will. At that point, I think the expectations, unless they run into a really hot team, should be Eastern Conference Final. I don't see why not. You know, if they get to the Eastern Conference Final, then I think at that point, Lightning are rolling. Everybody's playing well. As long as everyone's healthy and playing the right way, all bets are off. As to how much farther you could go is really up to them. And I think that even if they get to the second round, I think that's a huge plus. I think that's a good move in the right direction. Even if it's not an Eastern Conference, so maybe even a second round, I would settle for. So let me know in the comments below, and coming up right in just a couple of seconds, we'll be wrapping things up with little too early expectations for players. something's subject to change because obviously they still have some moves to make. Line combinations, have a lot of new faces playing with each other. So, these might not be accurate, but I'm just basing it off daily face-off. So check in on that and stay tuned for that. But first, we're going to talk about our last sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, I love sports, you love sports, and what we love more than just watching sports and playing sports is betting on sports. And unfortunately, because of the summer, no hockey, no basketball, no football, you don't have a lot of sports to bet on. But guess what? With the Olympics going on in full swing, you still have some time left. You could bet on the Olympics. You could bet on MLB. And this summer, you could do it all on FanDuel because FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the number one sportsbook in America. So one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel there. Hit the notification button so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. So just a little programming note. Now that we're in the month of August, we will be putting more out here and there to just keep going with the content for at least the 2004 rewatch. We will be going to 3 episodes a week. The minimum will be, like I said, we'll be putting out some episodes here and there just so we could finish up the content for the 04 run at least before training camp starts, or at least maybe I haven't decided yet where I want to end things with that, whether it be training camp or just right on the doorstep of the season. So stay tuned for that. But real quick before we wrap things up, we're talking about way too early player expectations on this team. Super easy. Braden Point, another 40, maybe even 50 goal season from him. Nikita Kucherov, 100 points. I would really like to see him score 45 this year, maybe 50. While somehow being able to still accumulate 100 points, which not playing on the same line as Stamkos and Point will be interesting to see how creative he gets with things. I have no doubt that Jake Getzel will be able to slide in. Obviously not be able to fill the void, but I think playing with Kucherov, obviously, as I've always said, has its perks, and I really, truly think Getzel will fit in nicely alongside Point, and I think that even if that's not something that is long term, you throw Cirelli up there on the middle, and you have Point on the wing with Kucherov. I think that's a phenomenal combination there, at least for your first line. So those two guys, I definitely expect to flourish. Brandon Hagel, I would really like to see him get to 30 goals this year, 35. Maybe a 85, 90 point season from him. Ideally, me being selfish, I would like to see him have a 40, 60 season, which is obviously, I don't think he's there just yet. In both regards, whether as a playmaker or as a scorer, I think he still has a little bit longer to develop in those fields. Nick Paul, I fully expect him to have a 25 goal season. He's a guy that has just been super solid since day one. I really think that now in his 3rd season in Tampa Bay, actually 4th season, I believe, I think that really he's ready to take that next step, if he hasn't already, as one of the leaders on this team and one of the most impact players on this team. And the same goes for Mikey Esimont. We've talked about it a ton on this podcast about how Mikey Esimont is always 1 second away from bursting out. We're all waiting for it. He has shown flashes of his ability to score and be a playmaker and his skill. And I think that this is the year it happens. I know it seems a little unlikely with some of the names on this team, but I'm confident. I'm confident in the structure of this team. I'm confident the leadership on this team, and I'm confident that Mikey Esamont will be one of the main impact players on this team. Mitchell Chafee, at least to round out some of the forwards that I have expectations for. I saw a lot of good things from him last year, just in his 200-foot game. And that's saying a lot, considering you bring up this kid from Syracuse who, quite frankly, a lot of us didn't really know a lot about, and he really handled it in stride in the very small amount of time that he was afforded at the NHL level. So I think now playing full time this year, I think is really going to do him wonders. And I think that even though he is projected right now on daily faceoff to play on the fourth line, I don't think that's something that's going to be long term. It's just going to be a matter of trying to figure out what to do with Connor Sheary, because I think that's really the variable here in this whole equation of what to do with Mitchell Chafee. Does Sheary get traded before the season starts? Does John Cooper maybe try to figure out a way to get Connor Sheary going by pairing him up with Jake Getzel, as they were both teammates on the Pittsburgh Penguins when they won cups? So, that's another idea there, and I think an idea that a lot of Lightning fans are kind of looking at to see if that's something that works out. As for the defensive side, real quick, really the one player I'm looking at, I know the obvious one is Ryan McDonagh, but we already kind of know what to get out of Ryan McDonagh, whether it be Nashville McDonagh or Tampa Bay McDonagh. But the player I'm really excited about and very curious to see what goes on with him is J.J. Moser, who was acquired in the Mikhail Sergachev trade with Utah. I everything I've heard about him, I absolutely love. I love that he plays very physical. He's a guy that also could produce a little bit offensively. I don't know if that's a good idea to put him with Perbix. I just think the Nick Perbix experience or experiment or whatever you want to call it has run its course in Tampa Bay. I just think it's a matter of time before he gets shipped out, whether it be before the season starts or at least at the trade deadline. So we'll have to sit tight for that one. But I would like to see Moser really be paired up with Chernak, if anything, just because it allows Chernak to kind of take a step back and reset and just have to worry about playing defense and also at the same time helping out a guy like Moser, who's still very much in the infancy of his NHL career. And then wrapping things up, of course, with the goaltending situation. I think Vazzy's going to make a play for the Vezina this year. I don't think he's going to win. I think, if anything, he'll finish third in the voting. But I think it seems like from everything that we saw in the playoffs, as short as that series was, you saw a lot of positives from him. He was making saves that, even though they are really standard saves you should be making, and even saves that some of the greater goaltenders in the league would make, he was making them. And they weren't really spectacular saves, but they were tough saves nonetheless. Saves that really, the last couple of years, we've seen him let up a little bit more often than we would like. So I really think that he's trending in the right direction. And I really think that with more time and a better defense in front of him, and unfortunately, it's just a whole domino effect thing. If the defense plays well in front of Vazzy will play well. And I think we will see a lot more flashes of his Vezina form throughout the season. But if he doesn't play well, then this team doesn't win games and doesn't perform as well. And I think, unfortunately, that's where it really has to be a good thing and work well for the Lightning. Because unfortunately, this team, to a certain extent, over the last couple of years, feeds off his goal play. Sometimes in a positive way and sometimes in a negative way. Sometimes this team is completely asleep at the wheel to start games, and him not being able to settle in really affects them for the rest of the game. And it really, when I look at that real quick, the way, they have to start games, I am more in the position of blaming the coaches and John Cooper. that just shows me a team that is not prepared and is not ready to play. And I know these guys are professionals and get literally paid millions of dollars to do this, and this is their job, but it's also on the coaches. They need to prepare their guys. So that's part of it too. Getting back to Vasilevsky real quick, I think that really I would expect 50 games out of him, maybe 55 if you want to stretch it. I would like to see 35 wins, maybe 40 if we're lucky. But I think 35 with a goals against average of 2.5. I think that's a pretty good area to be in, and I think it's a reasonable area to where the Lightning can be very successful as long as he's playing like that. So let me know in the comments below maybe some of your statistical expectations that you would expect from this team, whether it be individually or as a whole going into this season. And on the next episode, we'll be continuing our summer of 2004 rewatch, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Denker. I'll talk to you in the next one.